Richard Dalton's fist slammed into the conference room wall so hard the framed diplomas rattled. Nothing. His voice was a roar that made even his own lawyer flinch. You hear me, Olivia? You're leaving with nothing. He grabbed the divorce papers and hurled them across the table sheets, scattering like wounded birds. His face was crimson, a vein throbbing at his temple as he jabbed his finger inches from her face. 15 years you rode my coattails. 15 years you spent my money. Lived in my house, breathed my air. You were a nobody, a pathetic secretary, and you'll die a nobody. Jessica. His mistress smirked from behind him, twirling her new diamond bracelet. Richard leaned in close enough that Olivia could smell the whiskey on his breath. Sign these papers and crawl back to whatever hole you came from. You are nothing. But before we continue, if you want to see how this story ends, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Believe me, you'll want to stick around until the very end for this one, because what Richard doesn't know is about to destroy him. The divorce proceedings had dragged on for 6 months, but Richard Dalton treated each session like a victory lap. He'd arrive 15 minutes late every single time his new girlfriend Jessica draped on his arm like an expensive watch, which coincidentally she'd helped him pick out, using his soon-to-be ex-wife's credit card. That detail particularly delighted him. "Sorry we're late," Richard announced to the room, not sounding sorry at all. His voice boomed with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "Traffic was murder. You know how it is." He didn't look at Olivia, hadn't really looked at her in months. Why would he? In his mind, she'd already ceased to exist as anything more than an obstacle between him and his freedom. Jessica giggled, a sound like breaking glass, and whispered something in his ear. Richard's lawyer, Martin Chen, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Martin had been doing a lot of uncomfortable throat clearing lately. "Richard, if we could just focus." "Oh, we're focused, Martin. Crystal clear." Richard finally glanced at Olivia, and his lip curled. She sat across from him in a navy blazer that had seen better days. Her hair pulled back, simply no jewelry, except her wedding ring, which she still wore, he noticed with irritation. She looked small, tired, beaten, exactly how he wanted her to look. "How's the job search going, Liv? Any luck with those secretary positions?" Olivia's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, stiffened. "Mr. Dalton, that's inappropriate." "It's fine, Patricia," Olivia said quietly. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "I'm managing." "Managing." Richard laughed a sharp bark that made Jessica jump slightly. "That's rich. What are you managing? Your disappointment, your regret for wasting my time." He leaned back, spreading his arms wide across the leather chair like a king on a throne. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign these papers accepting the settlement we've outlined. You get the Honda, the old Honda, not the Mercedes. That's mine. You get your personal items. And you get to walk away with your dignity, or what's left of it." "Richard, the law states," Patricia began. "The law can state whatever it wants. I've got 3 attorneys who'll tie this up for years if necessary. Years." He turned his full attention to Olivia now, and there was something almost gleeful in his cruelty. "You think you can outlast me? You think you have the resources for a legal battle? You're living in a studio apartment in the bad part of town. I know I had someone check. You're eating ramen noodles and taking the bus. Meanwhile, I just closed a deal worth $4.2 million. Jessica squeezed his hand, her acrylic nails painted the color of fresh blood. "Baby, maybe we should just—" "No, she needs to hear this." Richard's eyes never left Olivia's face. He was hunting for a reaction any crack in her composure. "Every day you drag this out, you're hemorrhaging money you don't have. Your lawyer's not working pro bono, sweetheart. How much is she charging you, $250 an hour? $300? He smiled when Olivia's jaw tightened, finally a response. "That's what I thought. Do the math, Liv. You were never good at business, but surely you can add." Martin tried again. "Perhaps we should discuss the actual assets. The assets are mine." Richard's fist hit the table again, and this time the entire room went silent. "I built Dalton Enterprises from the ground up. Me, not her. She was home arranging flowers and hosting dinner parties while I was working 80-hour weeks. She contributed nothing. I contributed 15 years, Olivia said softly. The room froze. It was the first time she'd really spoken beyond one-word answers, and something in her tone made even Richard pause, but only for a moment. 15 years of spending my money, you mean? 15 years of playing housewife while I built an empire. He stood up now, towering over the table, playing to an invisible audience. You know what, I'm feeling generous today. Really I am. So here's my final offer. He nodded to Martin, who reluctantly slid a document across the table. You get $50,000, cash, the Honda, your clothes and personal items. You sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you will never discuss our marriage, my business, or anything related to me publicly, and you walk away. Today, right now. Patricia picked up the document, scanning it quickly, and her eyebrows shot up. This is unconscionable. 15 years of marriage, and you're offering essentially nothing. I'm offering her more than she came in with, Richard shot back. She was making $35,000 a year as a secretary when we met. I'd say $50,000 plus a car is a pretty good return on investment. Return on investment. Patricia's voice rose. She's not a stock portfolio, Mr. Dalton. She's a human being who devoted her time to living a life of luxury she never earned. Every vacation, every meal, every piece of clothing on her back, I provided. Richard was in full flow now, the rage that had been simmering for months finally boiling over. You want to know what kills me? She's acting like the victim, like I'm the bad guy. I gave her everything. Everything. And the second things got tough, the second the business hit a rough patch 3 years ago, where was she? Did she get a job? Did she help? No. She just kept spending, kept expecting me to fix everything. Huh. That rough patch, Olivia said, her voice still quiet, but somehow cutting through his tirade like a knife. You mean when the Henderson contract fell through? Richard's face flushed. That was a temporary setback that almost bankrupted you. Now there was something in Olivia's tone, something that made Martin sit up straighter. A temporary setback that had you drinking at 10 in the morning and screaming at associates over speakerphone. A temporary setback that would have destroyed everything if it hadn't been... She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. If it hadn't been what? Richard demanded. If it hadn't been for my brilliant strategic pivoting, my negotiations, my work. He laughed, but it sounded forced now. You don't know the first thing about how I saved that situation. Don't I? Olivia tilted her head slightly, and for just a moment something flickered in her eyes, something that made Richard's stomach twist uncomfortably. But then it was gone, and she was looking down at her hands again. You're right. I don't know anything about business. Sign the papers, Patricia. What? Patricia turned to her client, shocked. Olivia, I strongly advise against... Sign them. Richard couldn't believe his luck. He'd expected more fight, more tears, more desperate bargaining. This was too easy, but he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Smart girl, finally showing some sense. The signing took less than 10 minutes. Olivia's hand was steady as she put her signature on page after page. Richard watched with growing satisfaction, already mentally redecorating the house, planning the party he'd throw to celebrate his freedom. Jessica was already texting on her phone, probably picking out new furniture. When it was done, Olivia stood gathering her purse and the single folder that contained her copy of the agreement. She looked at Richard for a long moment, and he felt that uncomfortable twist again. But all she said was, "Goodbye, Richard." Yeah, don't let the door hit you." He was already turning away, reaching for Jessica's hand. "Martin drinks I'm buying. We're celebrating." As they left the building, Richard couldn't stop grinning. The late afternoon sun felt like a blessing on his face. Did you see her? Did you see her? God, that was satisfying. Jessica linked her arm through his. You were amazing, baby. So powerful. Damn right I was. 15 years of dead weight gone. Just like that. He snapped his fingers. You know what I feel 10 years younger. I feel like I could run a marathon. Hell, I feel like I could buy a marathon. Martin trailed behind them, briefcase in hand, looking troubled. Richard, I really think we should discuss what it's done, Martin. Over. Finished. The best deal I've ever made. Richard stopped at his car, a brand new Porsche Fire Engine Red, and spun around with his arms wide. I am free. Do you understand what that means? No more nagging, no more, when are you coming home and you work too much and we need to talk about us. No more deadweight dragging me down. She seemed very calm, Martin said carefully, almost too calm. That's because she knows she has no leverage, no options, no power. Richard unlocked the car, the lights flashing. She'll take her little 50 grand, get some apartment somewhere, maybe find some nobody to settle down with. And I'll be here living my best life, building my empire higher than ever. Jessica slid into the passenger seat. So where are we celebrating that new rooftop place downtown? Too pedestrian. I'm thinking the Azure, the one that requires a 3-month reservation wait. Richard revved the engine, feeling the power rumble through him. Money talks, baby, and I've got plenty to say. The Azure was exactly the kind of place Richard loved, ostentatiously expensive, dripping with exclusivity, full of people who thought wealth was a personality trait. The maitre d' recognized him immediately, of course. Richard had made sure of that with several generous tips over the past months. Mr. Dalton, what a pleasure. Your usual table. The best table, Richard corrected. I'm celebrating. Over $200 steaks and wine that cost more than Olivia's monthly rent, Richard held court. Jessica gazed at him adoringly while he recounted his victory, embellishing details, painting himself as even more dominant than he'd been. And then she just signed, didn't even put up a fight at the end. He drained his wine glass, already reaching for the bottle to pour another. You know why? Because deep down she knows. She knows she was nothing without me. You're so brave, Jessica cooed, starting fresh like this. Brave, I'm smart. I'm cutting loose the anchors and setting sail for bigger waters. He laughed at his own metaphor. Hell, without her expenses, I can finally make some real investments. That tech startup I've been looking at done. The property development in Austin done. The sky's the limit now. His phone buzzed. A text from his CFO, David Wong. Need to discuss Q3 projections, some concerning numbers. Call me. Richard deleted it without responding. Not tonight. Tonight was for celebrating, not worrying about minor financial fluctuations. David was always worried about something. That's why he was CFO and Richard was CEO, vision versus caution. You know what the best part is? Richard leaned across the table, his words slightly slurred now. 3 glasses of wine on an empty stomach, he'd been too excited to eat much. The best part is watching her realize what she lost. She had everything, and she threw it away. She threw it away. Martin, who'd been quietly eating his fish, finally spoke up. Richard, I'm pretty sure you're the one who filed for divorce. Semantics. Richard waved his hand dismissively. The marriage was dead anyway, dead and buried. She just didn't want to admit it. Kept pretending everything was fine, kept smiling at those stupid dinner parties, kept acting like we were some perfect couple. His face darkened. You know what I hated those parties. Hated every second. Having to parade around my own house with people I barely knew, making small talk about nothing. I thought those parties were for your business contacts, Martin said carefully. They were for her. She loved playing hostess, loved being the center of attention. Richard's narrative had shifted seamlessly from Olivia being invisible to being an attention seeker, but he didn't notice the contradiction. Everything had to be perfect. The flowers, the catering, the music. Do you know how much those parties cost? Thousands. Thousands. For what? So some clients could eat fancy cheese and pretend to like each other. Jessica looked confused. But didn't you say those parties helped you land major deals? Richard's eyes flashed with irritation. That was my networking, my charisma. The parties were just the setting. I could have done the same thing at a sports bar. He turned back to Martin. The point is, it's over. She's gone. And I'm better off in every conceivable way. But as the evening wore on and the wine kept flowing, Richard's celebration took on a manic edge. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through social media, looking at Olivia's accounts, which had all gone silent. No posts, no updates, nothing. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. What are you looking for? Jessica asked. Nothing, just checking something. He refreshed Olivia's profile again. Still nothing. It's weird, that's all. She was always posting stuff. Pictures of the house, the garden, her book club nonsense. Maybe she's taking time to process, Martin suggested. Process what there's nothing to process. It's done. Richard drained another glass. She's probably crying somewhere, calling her sister, crying about how her life is over. Good. She should cry. She should feel exactly what she put me through. What did she put you through? Martin asked quietly. Richard's head snapped up. I'm just asking, what specifically did Olivia do that was so terrible? Are you kidding me right now? She... Richard struggled his wine-soaked brain, fumbling for concrete examples. She didn't support me. She didn't understand the pressure I was under. She was always questioning my decisions, always acting like she knew better. Did she? Martin pushed. Know better. How dare you? Richard's voice dropped to something dangerous. You're my lawyer. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. That's why I'm concerned. Martin set down his fork. Richard, I've known you for 8 years. I've seen you build Dalton Enterprises into something impressive. But these past 6 months, you've been different, volatile, making impulsive decisions. I'm celebrating my freedom, Martin. If you can't handle that settlement we just gave her, it's legally questionable at best. 15 years of marriage in this state typically entitles a spouse to significant assets, especially when there's substantial wealth involved. If she'd had better representation, or if she decides to challenge it, she won't. Richard cut him off. She signed. It's done. And even if she tried, I'd bury her. I have an army of lawyers, unlimited resources, and zero mercy. She has nothing. Martin fell silent, but his expression remained troubled. He'd seen this movie before, wealthy clients underestimating their ex-spouses, assuming victory meant the war was over. It rarely ended well. Richard, oblivious to Martin's concerns, was back on his phone, still nothing from Olivia. It was starting to genuinely unsettle him. Where was the crying? The desperate phone calls, the attempts to negotiate. There was nothing, just silence, like she'd vanished. Earth to Richard. Jessica snapped her fingers in front of his face. You're being weird. I'm not being weird, I'm being thorough. He pocketed his phone. Let's get out of here. I want to go home, my house, without her in it. The house, a sprawling, modern mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, was dark when they arrived. Richard had insisted Olivia be fully moved out before tonight. He'd even hired movers to box up her things and deliver them to her new address, which he'd made a point of not knowing. Out of sight, out of mind. He flipped on the lights and the marble entryway gleamed. Everything was pristine, untouched, perfect. Exactly how he wanted it. Give me the grand tour, Jessica said, kicking off her heels. Richard walked through each room like a general surveying conquered territory. This is the living room. 40-foot ceilings. Those windows, floor-to-ceiling glass, custom-made in Italy. Cost more than most people's cars. It's gorgeous, Jessica breathed. It's mine. Richard's emphasis on the last word was almost violent. Every square inch, every piece of furniture, every painting. He stopped in front of a large, abstract piece above the fireplace. Well, except this one. This was hers, from her grandmother or something. She took it. The empty space on the wall bothered him more than it should have. It had been there for so long he'd stopped seeing it, but now its absence felt like an accusation. They moved through the dining room where Olivia had hosted those parties he claimed to hate, but which had actually secured 3 of his largest clients. Through the gourmet kitchen with appliances he'd never used because Olivia had done all the cooking. Through the home office where he'd worked late nights while she brought him coffee and dinner, never complaining about the hours. And this, he threw open the double doors to the master bedroom, is where the magic happens. Jessica giggled and pulled him close, but Richard's attention was caught by something on the dresser, a small envelope with his name on it, his handwriting not printed. He recognized it immediately, Olivia's neat, careful script. "What's that?" Jessica asked. "Nothing. Probably some final plea for mercy or whatever." But his hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. Inside was a single key and a note. "For the memories we made and the ones we won't. The garden shed code is 1015. I left something for you there. Goodbye, Richard." Garden shed? Jessica peered over his shoulder. "What's in your garden shed?" "Nothing. Garden tools. Maybe she left some of her junk there. I'll deal with it tomorrow." But that tremor in his hand had spread to his voice. Something about the note bothered him. It was too calm, too final, too much like she knew something he didn't. "Deal with it now," Jessica whined. "I don't want any of her stuff here. None of it." Against his better judgment, or maybe because of the wine, or maybe because he couldn't stand that feeling of uncertainty, Richard grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the garden shed. It was at the far end of the property, a small structure that Olivia had insisted on keeping when they bought the place. She'd said she wanted a space for her projects, though Richard had never paid attention to what those projects actually were. The code 1015 was their wedding anniversary, October 15th. He punched it in and the lock clicked open. The shed was empty except for a single box on the workbench, cardboard sealed with tape. On top was another note: "The truth was always here, you just never bothered to look." Richard's heart was pounding now, though he couldn't explain why. He tore open the box. Inside were files, dozens of them, financial records, business documents, correspondence. He pulled out the first one, squinting in the flashlight's beam. Henderson Contract Negotiations. The folder was labeled. He opened it. His own company letterhead stared back at him, but the signature at the bottom wasn't his. It was Olivia's. A letter to Henderson Incorporated, dated from 3 years ago, right during that rough patch he'd mentioned. The letter outlined a revised payment structure, new terms, and a compelling argument for why Henderson should stick with Dalton Enterprises despite the problems. Hassat. Richard's hands were shaking now as he grabbed another file. Clemson account recovery, another letter from Olivia, this one even more detailed, even more sophisticated. Technical language he didn't even know she knew, references to market conditions, and competitive analysis that were razor sharp. File after file after file. Olivia's signature, Olivia's work, Olivia's intelligence on every page. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He found his phone pulled up. His email searched for the Henderson correspondence. He'd saved everything. There it was, the email he'd sent to Henderson, the one he remembered writing at 3 a.m, the one that had saved the account. Except the timestamp showed Olivia's email address, as the sender forwarded to his account with a note: "Review and send under your name. The language needs to come from you for credibility. Trust me on this." He'd been so drunk that night, so stressed and panicked, he'd barely read it before hitting send. He'd thought it was his work, his brilliance under pressure, his save. "Richard," Jessica's voice echoed from the house. "What are you doing out there?" He couldn't answer. He was opening another file, and another. Years of correspondence, negotiations, contracts, all bearing Olivia's mark. Some were clearly her work sent from his email. Others were drafts she'd written that he'd polished or thought he'd written, and she'd polished he couldn't tell anymore. The line between his work and hers had blurred so completely he couldn't untangle it. At the bottom of the box was a ledger, personal financial records, his accounts. But entries he didn't recognize, large deposits during that rough patch, all marked from Sterling Holdings, LLC. Sterling, Olivia's maiden name. The deposits totaled $3.8 million. $3.8 million that had kept Dalton Enterprises afloat when it was drowning. $3.8 million he'd never known about. $3.8 million that Olivia had funneled into his accounts, saving him, saving his company, saving his reputation. Richard dropped the ledger like it was on fire. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. It wasn't possible. Olivia was a secretary. She didn't have that kind of money. She didn't have those kinds of skills. She didn't have his phone rang. David Wong, the CFO. Richard answered without thinking. "Richard, thank God. Listen, I need you to look at these Q3 numbers. Something's not adding up. We're showing some accounts that I can't trace back to their origin, and I need authorization to—" "Sterling Holdings," Richard interrupted, his voice hollow. "What do you know about Sterling Holdings?" Silence on the other end, then carefully. "Richard, are you okay? You sound— What do you know about Sterling Holdings?" "It was a shell corporation. Provided capital injection in 2023 when we were having liquidity issues. I assumed you'd arranged it. The paperwork came through your office. Your signature was on everything." "My signature?" "Well, yes. You signed off on the agreements, the terms, everything. It saved us, Richard. Without that capital, we would have gone under. You never told me where you found them, but I assumed it was one of your connections. Why, What's going on? Richard ended the call. His legs felt weak. He sat down hard on the shed floor, surrounded by evidence of his own ignorance. She'd saved him. She'd saved everything. And he'd never known, never asked, never wondered how the money had appeared right when he needed it, how the deals had closed when they seemed impossible, how the contracts had been saved when they were falling apart. He'd taken credit for all of it. He'd built his reputation on work that was at least partially, maybe significantly hers. And he'd just walked out of a courtroom where he'd called her nothing, given her nothing, dismissed her as insignificant. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Oh, God, what did I do?" Jessica appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the house lights. "Richard, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He had. The ghost of his own delusion, the ghost of his certainty, the ghost of his assumed superiority. But worse than that was the realization now crystallizing in his mind: if Olivia had this kind of money, this kind of skill, this kind of power, and she'd hidden it from him for years, used it to support him without his knowledge, and then walked away from his pitiful settlement without a fight. What else was she hiding? What else did she have planned? And why did she let him win so easily? Richard staggered back to the house, his mind reeling. Jessica was talking, saying something about being tired and wanting to go to bed, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. He couldn't focus, couldn't think past the files, the numbers, the truth that had just detonated his entire worldview. "I need to make a call," he mumbled. "Now, Richard, it's almost midnight." "I need to make a call!" His voice was sharp enough that Jessica stepped back, hurt flashing across her face. He didn't care. He pulled out his phone and dialed Martin's number. "Richard, it's late. Whatever this is can wait until—" "She had millions, millions. She funded my company when it was failing and I never knew. How is that possible? How did she hide that kind of money?" Another long silence. When Martin spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "What are you talking about?" Richard explained it all in a rush: the files, the ledger sterling holdings, the $3.8 million. With each word, the reality of his situation became clearer and more terrifying. When he finished, Martin was quiet for so long that Richard thought the call had dropped. Martin. I'm here. I'm just thinking." A pause. "Richard, did it ever occur to you to ask about Olivia's background before you married her?" "What?" "Of course I did. She was a secretary at Henderson. She came from a normal family. Her parents were dead. She had a sister. That's it." "Her parents were dead," Martin repeated slowly. "And she had a sister. Did you ever meet the sister?" "Once. At the wedding. She was cold, didn't say much. Why does this matter?" "Because, Richard, I'm looking at corporate records right now. Sterling Holdings, LLC. Want to guess who the managing partner is?" Richard's blood ran cold. "Tell me." "A woman named Catherine Sterling. Ring any bells?" "That's her sister. So what? They shared a last name. It doesn't mean anything by itself. But Sterling Holdings isn't some small operation, Richard. It's a private equity firm with assets in the billions. Billions, with a capital B. And according to public filings, it's been around for 20 years. Catherine Sterling founded it. And Olivia Sterling was listed as a silent partner from day one." The room was spinning. Richard grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "That's impossible. She was working as a secretary, making $35,000 a year." "Was she—" Martin's voice had taken on the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Or was that just what you saw, Richard? Did you ever think to ask why someone from a family with billions would be working as a secretary? She said she wanted to be independent, wanted to make her own way. Or maybe," Martin said quietly, "she was looking for something else, or someone else. Maybe someone who would value her for herself, not her money. Maybe someone who would really see her beyond her last name and her bank account." "But I did value her. I married her. I gave her everything." "You gave her money she already had more of. You gave her a lifestyle she could have bought 10 times over. What did you actually give her, Richard? What did you see in her besides a beautiful woman who made you look good at events?" Richard opened his mouth to answer and found he couldn't. The memories that came flooding back were all transactional. She'd been useful, she'd been attractive, she'd been available. But had he ever really known her? Her dreams, her capabilities, her mind? "She never told me," he finally whispered. "She hid all of it. Or you never asked, Martin countered. And Richard. That settlement you just pushed through. The one where you gave her essentially nothing. If she challenges it, and if her actual net worth is what I think it is, you're going to look like either a fool or a fraud. Maybe both. She won't challenge it. She signed it. She signed it very quickly, Martin agreed, almost like she wanted you to think you'd won. Those words hung in the air like a curse. Richard's mind raced back to that moment in the conference room, Olivia's calm voice saying, "Sign the papers, Patricia." The way she'd looked at him, that flicker in her eyes, he hadn't been able to place. She'd known. She'd known exactly what she was doing. "What do I do?" Richard asked, and hated how small his voice sounded. "Right now, nothing. Maybe she really is just walking away. Maybe she's decided you're not worth the fight, or maybe—" Martin trailed off. "Maybe what? Maybe she's playing a longer game. A much longer game. And you just gave her exactly what she wanted: freedom from you, legal separation of assets, and an NDA that cuts both ways. You can't talk about her, Richard, and she can't talk about you. Whatever she knows about your business, your dealings, your financial arrangements, it's all locked away now. You made sure of that." Richard's stomach dropped. "Oh, God. Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning. And Richard, don't do anything stupid. Don't try to contact her. Don't try to renegotiate. Just wait. See what happens." The call ended. Richard stood in his enormous empty house, the house that suddenly felt less like a triumph and more like a mausoleum, and tried to understand how his perfect victory had transformed into something that felt an awful lot like defeat. Jessica had fallen asleep on the couch, her mouth slightly open, one shoe still on. Richard looked at her and felt nothing. Not affection, not desire, not even irritation. Just nothing. She was there because she was easy, because she laughed at his jokes and didn't challenge him and made him feel powerful. Exactly what he'd thought he wanted. Exactly what he'd thought he'd had with Olivia, minus the complications. Except now those complications were revealing themselves to be the actual substance, and he'd thrown it all away for a hollow imitation. He walked to his office, the one Olivia had set up for him. He remembered now the one where she'd organized his files and managed his calendar and reminded him about important meetings. How much of his success had been built on her invisible labor? How much of his reputation rested on foundations she'd laid without his knowledge or appreciation? He pulled up his company's financial records, really looking at them for the first time in years. There tucked into the spreadsheets were the Sterling Holdings payments, $3.8 million dispersed over 6 months. The timing was perfect, exactly when he'd needed it most, in amounts calibrated to solve specific problems without raising red flags. She'd saved him, and he'd never even said thank you because he'd never known to say it. Richard picked up the phone to call her, then remembered he'd deleted her number. Blocked it, actually, the night he'd filed for divorce, a petty gesture of control. Now it felt like he'd cut his own lifeline. He searched for her on social media again. Still nothing. Her profiles were active but silent. No posts, no updates, no indication of where she was or what she was doing. She'd become a ghost. Or maybe a small voice in his head whispered she'd simply stopped performing for an audience that never appreciated the show. Richard sat in his office until dawn, surrounded by the evidence of his own blindness, and wondered what happened next. In his imagination, this night was supposed to be the beginning of his new life, free, unencumbered, triumphant. Instead, it felt like the end of something he hadn't known he had until it was too late. And somewhere out there, Olivia was doing what? Crying, struggling, or something else entirely. He had no idea, and that more than anything else terrified him, because Richard Dalton had built his entire identity on being the smartest person in the room, the one with the most power, the one who always won. But if Olivia had been pulling strings, he'd never seen supporting him in ways he'd never recognized, playing a game he'd never realized was happening. Then who had really been in control all along? And if she'd walked away without a fight after 15 years of supporting him in secret? What was she walking toward? The sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Richard watched it from his office window and felt for the first time in his life truly afraid. Not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd never actually had, and what Olivia might do with all that power he'd never known she possessed. 3 months passed like a fever dream Richard couldn't quite shake. He threw himself into work with manic intensity, staying at the office until 2-3 in the morning, closing deals with an aggression that bordered on ruthless. His team started avoiding him in the hallways. David Wong, his CFO, stopped CCing him on emails after Richard had torn into him over a minor discrepancy in front of the entire accounting department. "You're different," David said one afternoon, catching Richard in the break room. "Ever since the divorce, you're like a live wire." "I'm focused," Richard snapped, dumping 3 sugars into his coffee. His hand shook slightly. He hadn't been sleeping well. "Maybe you should try it sometime instead of questioning every decision I make." David held up his hands. "I'm not questioning. I'm worried. You've lost 15 pounds. You look exhausted. And some of these deals you're pushing, they're aggressive, Richard, really aggressive. Aggressive wins, cautious loses." Richard pushed past him. "I don't pay you to worry about my health. I pay you to make me money." But the truth was, Richard couldn't stop thinking about that box in the garden shed. He'd gone through every file a dozen times trying to find some explanation that didn't completely undermine his understanding of his own life. Maybe Olivia had forged some of those documents. Maybe she was exaggerating her involvement. Maybe. Except the numbers didn't lie. The dates matched. The signatures were verified. And when he'd quietly checked with his bank, they'd confirmed yes, Sterling Holdings had indeed provided that capital. Yes, the terms had been extraordinarily favorable. No, they couldn't provide more information about the beneficial owners without a court order. He'd thought about getting that court order, but that would mean admitting he didn't know who'd saved his company, and Richard Dalton didn't admit ignorance about his own business. Jessica moved into the house officially 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Richard came home one day to find her clothes in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom, her presents everywhere. He'd said it was fine, great, even exactly what he wanted. But something clenched in his chest when he saw her makeup scattered across the counter where Olivia used to keep one small organized bag. "I was thinking we should redecorate," Jessica said over dinner takeout because neither of them cooked. "The whole house feels so cold, like a museum." "Olivia decorated it," Richard said without thinking. Jessica's fork paused midway to her mouth. "Okay, well that's my point. We need to make it ours. New furniture, new colors, new energy." "Fine, whatever. Do what you want." But the idea made him inexplicably angry, as if changing the house would erase the last evidence that Olivia had ever existed, and despite everything, he wasn't ready for that. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock embossed lettering, the kind of invitation that screamed money and power. The annual Apex Business Gala, hosted by the city's most exclusive business consortium. Richard received one every year, though his table placement had varied depending on Dalton Enterprises' current standing. Last year, he'd been table 12, respectable, visible, close enough to the stage to matter. "This is perfect," he told Jessica, waving the invitation. "Every major player in the city will be there. Investors, CEOs, city council members. I can network, make connections, maybe land that Meridian contract I've been chasing." "What should I wear?" Jessica was already scrolling through designer websites on her phone. "Something expensive. We need to look successful." Richard studied the invitation more carefully. Black tie, dinner, and keynote speaker. This year's theme, innovation and leadership in modern business. This is exactly what I need, a chance to remind everyone that Dalton Enterprises is a force to be reckoned with. David was less enthusiastic when Richard mentioned it the next day. "The gala, Richard, that's in 3 days. Don't you think we should focus on closing the Hendricks deal first? We're still waiting on their final approval, and if we don't, the Hendricks deal is fine. Stop catastrophizing." Richard was filling out his RSVP, already planning his talking points. "This gala is important. The kind of connections I can make there could dwarf Hendricks." "The kind of connections you could make," David repeated slowly. "Richard, you realize those connections aren't just about showing up right. They're about reputation, relationship building, trust, things that take time." "Things Olivia used to handle," Richard snapped before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them. "Forget it. Just make sure the quarterly reports look good. I want to have solid numbers when people ask." David left, shaking his head, and Richard tried to ignore the voice in his mind that sounded uncomfortably like his ex-wife. "You're moving too fast. You're not thinking clearly. You're letting your ego drive decisions that should be strategic." The night of the gala arrived with Richard in a state of barely contained excitement. He'd bought a new tuxedo custom-fitted Italian silk. Jessica wore a dress that cost more than some people's monthly rent, red and plunging and designed to turn heads. They arrived in the Porsche, Richard tipping the valet a $100 bill just because he could. "This is amazing," Jessica breathed as they entered the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a string quartet playing something classical and expensive sounding. "Everyone here is so important." Richard scanned the room, categorizing people by their net worth and usefulness. There was Patterson from Patterson Industries, worth at least $50 million. The mayor chatting with someone Richard didn't recognize. Henderson, the same Henderson whose contract Olivia had saved, though Richard still hadn't fully processed that detail. A hostess approached with a seating chart. "Name, please." "Richard Dalton, Dalton Enterprises." He said it with the confidence of someone expecting a prime placement. The hostess scanned her list, scanned it again. Her professional smile flickered. "Ah, yes, Mr. Dalton. You're at table 27. 27? Richard's voice rose. "That's where is table 27. She gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. "Near the northwest corner, sir. The waitstaff can direct you." Richard's face flushed. Table 27. That was practically in the kitchen. That was where they put people who barely mattered, who'd been invited out of obligation rather than respect. Last year, he'd been table 12. How had he dropped 15 places? "There must be a mistake," he said tightly. "I'm CEO of Dalton Enterprises. We're a major player in this city. I'm sure it's fine, baby." Jessica tugged on his arm. "Let's just find our table." But it wasn't fine. Richard could feel eyes on him as they made their way through the ballroom, past the good tables, past the decent tables, past the acceptable tables, all the way to the back corner where table 27 sat like a punishment. The other people at the table were nobodies. A real estate agent he didn't recognize, an accountant from a mid-tier firm, a woman who introduced herself as the assistant director of something or other. Richard barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the front of the room on the tables he should have been sitting at. Table 1 was practically on the stage. Table 3 had the mayor. Table 7 had Patterson. And then something happened that made Richard's blood freeze. The room's energy shifted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd like wind through grass. "Who is that?" Jessica whispered, craning her neck. Richard turned to look and felt the floor drop out from under him. Olivia. But not the Olivia he knew. Not the quiet, simply dressed woman who'd signed away her rights 3 months ago. This Olivia wore a floor-length gown that probably cost more than his Porsche midnight blue that made her skin glow. Her hair was styled in a way he'd never seen elegant and sophisticated. Diamonds at her throat and wrists, real ones he could tell even from this distance, the kind that caught light and threw it back, multiplied. She walked into that ballroom like she owned it, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were clearly security, and the crowd parted for her like she was royalty. "Oh my God," the real estate agent at Richard's table breathed. "That's Olivia Sterling." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Sterling, her maiden name, the name on those files, the name he'd dismissed and forgotten. "Olivia Sterling." Jessica frowned. "Who's that?" "You don't know." The accountant looked shocked. "She's only the CEO of Aura Global. They just closed a deal worth $2 billion with the Singapore government. It's been all over the financial news." Richard couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch as Olivia was escorted to table 1, and seated directly next to the mayor. People were lining up to shake her hand to introduce themselves, to bask in her presence. "Aura Global," Richard whispered. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "That's impossible." "What's impossible?" Jessica was looking between Richard and Olivia with growing confusion. "Wait, is that your ex-wife?" The assistant director leaned in, clearly thrilled to share gossip. "That's Richard Dalton's ex-wife. Oh my God, I heard about that divorce. Heard he took her for everything. Guess the rumors were wrong, huh?" Richard's hands clenched into fists under the table. This couldn't be happening. Aura Global. He'd heard that name, seen it in business journals, noted it as a competitor to watch, a powerful corporation that had seemingly appeared from nowhere about 5 years ago, quickly establishing itself as a major player in international commerce and development. 5 years ago, right around when his marriage to Olivia had started showing cracks. "I need to talk to her," Richard said, starting to stand. Jessica grabbed his arm. "Richard, maybe that's not a good idea." He shook her off and started making his way toward the front of the room. But Olivia's security, intercepted him before he got within 20 feet of table 1. "Sir, I'm going to need you to return to your seat," one of them said politely but firmly. "I need to speak with Ms. Sterling. I'm where I know her." "Ms. Sterling's schedule is fully booked this evening. If you'd like to request a meeting, you can contact her office through the standard channels." The security guard's expression made it clear this conversation was over. Richard found himself being gently but inexorably guided back toward table 27, his face burning with humiliation. People were watching, whispering. He could feel their eyes, their judgment, their amusement. When he sat back down, Jessica was pale. "Richard, what the hell is going on? Your ex-wife is the CEO of Aura Global. How did you not know that?" She never... Richard couldn't form a complete sentence. His brain was trying to process too much information at once. Olivia was wealthy. Olivia was powerful. Olivia had been playing him for 15 years. No, not playing. Something worse. Something that made his role in their marriage feel like that of a puppet who'd thought he was the puppeteer. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The MC, some local news personality, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the annual Apex Business Gala. Tonight, we celebrate innovation leadership and the visionaries who are shaping our city's future." Applause. Richard's hands stayed frozen in his lap. This year, we're honored to have as our keynote speaker a woman who exemplifies everything this gala represents. In just 5 short years, she's built a corporation that operates in 37 countries, employs over 10,000 people, and has revolutionized how we think about sustainable development and ethical business practices. Richard felt sick. He knew what was coming, but his mind refused to accept it. Please join me in welcoming the CEO and founder of Aura Global, Olivia Sterling. The applause was thunderous. People stood. Richard remained seated paralyzed as Olivia rose from table 1 and walked to the stage with the grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, which he realized with dawning horror she probably had. While he'd thought she was at home reading or gardening or whatever he'd assumed she did with her time, she'd been building an empire. Olivia stood at the podium, the spotlight making her glow like something ethereal. She smiled, not the soft, accommodating smile Richard remembered, but something sharper, more confident, more real. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried perfectly through the sound system. "I have to admit, standing here tonight feels particularly meaningful, because 5 years ago when I founded Aura Global, I did it in secret." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard leaned forward despite himself. "I did it in secret because I was in a marriage where my capabilities, my intelligence, my worth were not just underestimated, they were invisible." Olivia's eyes swept the room, and Richard could have sworn they paused on him for just a moment. "I was told repeatedly that I didn't understand business, that I should leave such matters to those who knew better, that my role was to support, not to lead." The room was absolutely silent, every eye fixed on Olivia. "So I built Aura Global in the shadows. I negotiated deals during the hours my husband thought I was shopping. I took meetings he assumed were book clubs. I saved his failing company with my own capital, and he never even asked where the money came from." Her voice remained steady, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "I did all of this not because I wanted to deceive anyone, but because I wanted to prove something to myself, that I was more than what others saw, that I was more than a supporting character in someone else's story." Richard felt like he was going to vomit. She was talking about him, in front of everyone, in front of the entire business community of the city. "And tonight, I'm here to tell you all, but especially the young women in this room, that you are never too old, too overlooked, or too underestimated to build something extraordinary. The person who doesn't see your value, that's not your problem. That's theirs." Olivia paused, letting her words sink in. 3 months ago, I finalized a divorce from a man who offered me $50,000 as settlement for 15 years of marriage. I signed those papers without argument. Do you know why? The tension in the room was unbearable. Richard wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but here, because I'd already taken everything that mattered. Olivia's smile widened slightly. You see, when you're invisible, people don't guard their secrets around you. They don't protect their information. They don't watch what they sign. My ex-husband, in his eagerness to finalize our divorce, signed several documents without his lawyer properly reviewing them. Documents that transferred certain debts, certain liabilities, certain legal obligations to his name alone. Richard's heart stopped. The room started to spin. Documents that made him personally responsible for loans I'd quietly placed in both our names during our marriage. Loans he used, benefited from, but never knew existed. Olivia's voice remained pleasant, almost cheerful. Loans that total, at current interest rates, approximately $12 million. The room erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers, someone's champagne glass hitting the floor. Richard couldn't move, couldn't think. $12 million. Personally responsible. He'd signed something. She'd handed him papers. He'd been so eager to be done with her, he'd signed everything Martin put in front of him without reading carefully, without questioning. Because he'd been so certain he was winning. Now I want to be clear, Olivia continued over the noise. I'm not a vindictive person. I'm a businesswoman. Those loans. They were legitimate business expenses. Dalton Enterprises benefited enormously from that capital. The problem is, Dalton Enterprises no longer exists as a solvent entity. My forensic accountants, and yes, I've had them examining everything for the past year, have discovered some interesting discrepancies. Accounts that were borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Deals that looked profitable on paper, but were actually hemorrhaging money. A house of cards held together by wishful thinking and creative accounting. David. Richard's eyes shot to the side of the room where he'd seen his CFO earlier. David's face was ashen, his hand over his mouth. Wait! The mayor stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. Are you telling us that Dalton Enterprises is insolvent? I'm telling you that Dalton Enterprises has been functionally insolvent for approximately 2 years, propped up by loans and capital injections that Mr. Dalton can no longer repay. And as of today, those debts are now his personal responsibility. Olivia's expression didn't change. I filed the necessary paperwork this afternoon. It's all legal, all documented, all ironclad. Richard finally found his voice. You can't do this! He was on his feet, shouting across the ballroom. Security started moving, but Olivia held up a hand. Mr. Dalton, she said, her voice carrying easily, even though she wasn't shouting, you're welcome to challenge any of this in court. In fact, I encourage it. Because discovery will be fascinating. We can examine every deal, every contract, every decision you've made over the past 15 years. We can bring in every person you've screwed over, every partner you've cheated, every employee you've exploited. I have documentation for all of it. Do you? Richard's mouth opened and closed. He had nothing. No words, no defense, no escape. That's what I thought. Olivia turned back to the audience, dismissing him as easily as swatting a fly. Now where was I? Ah, yes, the importance of knowing your worth and never letting anyone diminish it. You see, the most valuable thing I learned in my marriage wasn't about business or strategy. It was about patience, about playing the long game, about understanding that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's success. The applause started slowly, uncertainly, then built to a crescendo. People were standing again, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like witnessing something historic. The complete and total destruction of Richard Dalton executed with surgical precision in front of everyone who mattered. Richard stumbled backward, his legs weak. Jessica was pulling at him, saying something he couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. He saw David across the room, saw the horror and resignation on his CFO's face, and understood that David had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to be afraid. Security was escorting Richard toward the exit now, not Olivia's security, but the gala's security, making it clear he was no longer welcome. He caught one last glimpse of Olivia on the stage, radiant and powerful, and completely in control, before he was pushed through the doors into the hallway. The cool air hit him like a slap. Jessica was crying, mascara running down her face. Richard, what does this mean? What is she talking about? $12 million. It means I'm ruined, Richard whispered. It means she's been planning this for years. It means he couldn't finish, couldn't process the magnitude of his miscalculation. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The lawyers will be in touch Monday. I recommend you retain excellent counsel. You'll need it. Oh. Richard slid down the wall, sitting hard on the marble floor of the hallway. Through the ballroom doors, he could hear Olivia's voice continuing her speech, hear the laughter and applause. Inside that room, his reputation was being cremated, his business destroyed, his future obliterated, and he'd done it to himself. He'd signed the papers. He'd dismissed her. He'd been so convinced of his own superiority that he'd never seen the trap closing around him. "We need to go," Jessica was saying. "Richard, we need to leave. Everyone's staring." But Richard couldn't move, could only sit there in the hallway of his own destruction, listening to the woman he'd called nothing receive a standing ovation for his annihilation. The valet brought this Porsche around, and Richard sat in the driver's seat, staring at nothing, while Jessica sobbed in the passenger seat. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white, but he couldn't make himself turn the key. Couldn't make himself move. Behind them, the gala continued, and he could almost feel the conversations happening inside his name being passed around like a disease. "We need to call someone," Jessica finally managed through her tears. "A lawyer. Your lawyer. Martin. Someone who can fix this." "Fix this?" Richard's laugh was hollow, broken. "You heard her. She's been planning this for years. Years. While I thought I was winning, she was building a cage around me, and I walked right into it." His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text after text, call after call. He glanced at the screen. David Wong, Martin Chen. 3 different business associates. A reporter from the Financial Times. Another from Bloomberg. They smelled blood in the water. "Answer it," Jessica urged. "Answer the phone, Richard. Maybe David can explain. Maybe it's not as bad as she made it sound." Richard hurled the phone against the dashboard. It cracked the screen's spiderwebbing and went dark. The violence of it made Jessica flinch away from him, pressing herself against the passenger door. "It's exactly as bad as she made it sound. Worse, probably." Richard's voice was dead. "She doesn't bluff. That's what I never understood. She doesn't make threats. She makes promises." He finally started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, driving too fast, weaving through traffic with the recklessness of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences. Jessica kept telling him to slow down, but her voice was just noise. All Richard could hear was Olivia's words playing on loop in his head. Documents he'd signed, debts he'd incurred, $12 million. The house was dark when they arrived. Richard went straight to his office, Jessica trailing behind, asking questions he didn't answer. He turned on every light, pulled out every file, every document related to the divorce, the settlement papers, the asset division, the non-disclosure agreement. "What are you looking for?" Jessica hovered in the doorway. Mascara streaked down her face like war paint. "Proof. Evidence. Something." Richard was tearing through papers, his hands shaking. "She said I signed documents. I need to find what I signed." There. 3 pages stapled together, mixed in with the asset division paperwork. Assumption of joint liability agreement. Richard's signature at the bottom dated 3 months ago. His eyes scanned the legal language, and with each word, his stomach dropped further. The party of the first part assumes full personal responsibility for all outstanding debts incurred jointly during the marriage, including but not limited to business loans, lines of credit, and capital investments made in the name of Dalton Enterprises. "No," Richard whispered. No. Martin wouldn't have let me sign this. He would have caught this." But even as he said it, he remembered. Martin had been explaining something, going through the papers page by page, and Richard had cut him off. "Just tell me where to sign, Martin. I don't need the whole legal dissertation. I want this done today." He'd been so eager, so certain, so stupid. Jessica picked up one of the pages. "What does this mean? In English, what does this mean?" "It means every loan Olivia took out in both our names I'm now solely responsible for. It means she can collect from me personally. It means Dalton Enterprises' debts are my debts." Richard collapsed into his chair. "It means she owns me." The next morning came too soon and brought horrors Richard hadn't anticipated. His face was on the front page of the Financial Times website. Tech CEO's ex-wife reveals years-long deception billions in hidden assets. The article was detailed, devastating, and clearly sourced from someone with intimate knowledge of the situation. Someone like Olivia. His email inbox was chaos. Clients requesting immediate meetings, partners demanding explanations, his board of directors calling an emergency session, and worst of all, his bank inquiring about several large transfers that had been flagged for review. David Wong appeared at the house by 9 a.m., his face drawn and exhausted. "We need to talk. Now." They sat in the living room, and David laid out a folder, thick with papers. "I've been going through everything since last night. Richard, she wasn't exaggerating. Dalton Enterprises is hemorrhaging money. Has been for over a year." "That's impossible. Our quarterly reports—" "We're creative fiction." David's voice was flat. "I've been moving money between accounts, borrowing from new investors to pay old ones, delaying payments, accelerating receivables on paper. Classic signs of a company in death spiral. I tried to tell you, multiple times. You wouldn't listen." Richard felt cold. "How bad?" "Without an immediate capital injection of at least $8 million, we're bankrupt in 60 days, maybe less." David pulled out another sheet. "And these loans Olivia mentioned, they're real. I found them buried in our records. Someone with access to our accounts, someone with intimate knowledge of our financial structure, created a web of debt that all traces back to you personally. The company benefited, but you're liable." "Someone with intimate knowledge." Richard laughed bitterly. "She had my passwords, all of them. She set up my email, managed my calendar. She had access to everything." "For years," David agreed. "Which means she's been watching, waiting, documenting. Richard, this isn't something that happened overnight. This is years of careful planning. She's been 3 steps ahead the entire time." Jessica came down the stairs, her hair uncombed, wearing one of Richard's shirts. "What's going on? Why is David here?" "We're having a business discussion," Richard snapped. "Go upstairs. Don't talk to me like that. I live here too." "Do you?" Richard's rage finally found a target. "Do you live here? Because last I checked, this house is about to be seized by creditors. This house, the cars, the bank accounts, everything. So no, Jessica, you don't live here. You're just visiting a sinking ship." She stared at him, mouth open, then turned and ran back upstairs. Richard heard a door slam and didn't care. David was watching him carefully. "You need to get ahead of this. Call Martin. Start damage control. Maybe if you reach out to Olivia, negotiate. Negotiate." Richard's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "You think she wants to negotiate? She just destroyed me in front of the entire business community. She's not interested in deals. She's interested in watching me burn." His phone, a replacement he'd bought that morning, rang. "Martin Chen." Richard answered on speaker. "Tell me you have good news." "I have terrible news." Martin's voice was grim. "I've been served with papers. Olivia's legal team is filing suit to collect on those debts. They're also filing a separate suit claiming fraud, stating that you deliberately misrepresented the value of Dalton Enterprises during divorce proceedings. And Richard, they have evidence. Emails, financial records, recorded phone calls. Recorded phone calls, that's illegal. Not if one party consents to the recording. And in this state, one-party consent is the law. If Olivia recorded conversations between the two of you, it's perfectly admissible." Martin paused. "How many times did you discuss business with her? How many times did you brag about deals, about manipulating numbers, about, quote, creative accounting?" Richard's blood ran cold. Dozens of times. Hundreds, maybe. He'd come home buzzed from celebrations, from client dinners, and told her everything. Boasted about how he'd gotten contracts, about corners he'd cut, about ethical lines he'd blurred. She'd always just listened, nodding, smiling, asking the occasional question. He'd thought she was being a good wife. She'd been building a case. "They're going to audit everything," Martin continued. "Every deal, every contract, every financial statement from the past 15 years. Richard, if there's anything that won't hold up to scrutiny now, is the time to tell me." Richard looked at David. David looked away. "There's a lot that won't hold up," Richard whispered. "Then we have a problem, a massive problem." Martin's frustration was evident. I told you to read those papers. I told you some of the language was concerning, but you insisted on rushing through, insisted on winning fast rather than winning smart. And now I'm screwed. I get it, Martin. You don't have to rub it in. Richard ended the call and threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor intact this time, but the violence still felt good. David stood up. I need to protect myself. I'm going to hire my own lawyer, make it clear I was following your orders. I documented everything every time you overruled my recommendations. I'm sorry, Richard, but I have a family. Get out. Richard, get out of my house. Richard was on his feet now, towering over David, his fists clenched. You're abandoning me after everything I've done for you. Everything you've done for me. David's voice rose to match Richard's. You mean paying me to clean up your messes, to make your reckless decisions look legitimate, to lie on financial reports? I've been complicit in your fraud, Richard, and I'm not going down with you. David grabbed his folder and left. The front door slammed. Richard stood alone in his living room, surrounded by expensive furniture he'd soon lose in a house that would be taken from him, and felt the full weight of his isolation. His phone, somehow still functional, buzzed with a new email. From an address he didn't recognize. The subject line, just the beginning. He opened it. Richard, by now, you understand the situation. But let me be crystal clear about what's coming next. Tomorrow, the IRS will receive an anonymous tip about discrepancies in Dalton Enterprises tax filings. Next week, 3 of your largest clients will receive documentation of contract violations you committed. The week after that, several of your investors will learn that money they provided for specific projects was diverted elsewhere. I have evidence of everything. Every lie, every shortcut. Every time you put your ego before ethics. You built your empire on sand, and I'm about to prove it. You called me nothing. You're about to learn what nothing actually feels like, OS. Richard read it 3 times, then a 4th, hoping the words would change. They didn't. The doorbell rang. Richard answered it to find a process server holding an envelope. Richard Dalton. Yes. You've been served. The man handed him the envelope and left. Inside were legal documents, thick and official. Olivia Sterling versus Richard Dalton case. Number 2024-CV-018472. Lawsuit for collection of debt fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and a dozen other claims. The amount sought $12 million plus damages, attorney fees, and costs. Jessica came back downstairs, her eyes red. Richard, I've been thinking, maybe I should go stay with my sister for a few days, just until this blows over. This isn't going to blow over. Richard's voice was mechanical. This is my life now. This is what she's made of my life. But you'll fix it right. You always fix things. You're Richard Dalton. I'm nothing, he interrupted. That's what she said. Remember? And she was right. Without her propping me up, without her money and her intelligence and her work, I'm nothing. I'm a fraud who got caught. Jessica stared at him. So that's it? You're just giving up? I'm being realistic. She has better lawyers, more money, evidence I can't refute. She's been planning this for years while I was too arrogant to see it. Richard slumped onto the couch. The only question now is how much she's going to take. And I think the answer is everything. I can't do this. Jessica was backing toward the stairs. I can't be with someone who's given up. I thought you were strong. I thought you were powerful. You thought I was rich, Richard corrected. That's all you ever cared about. The money, the lifestyle, the status. Well, it's gone. Or it will be soon. So go ahead. Leave. Join the parade of people abandoning the sinking ship. She did. 30 minutes later, he heard her car start and drive away. The house fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a clock Olivia had picked out, he remembered suddenly. Everything in this house bore her mark, her taste, her choices. He'd just been living in the world she created, thinking he was the creator. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in destruction. Every day brought new horrors. The IRS audit began, and within 48 hours, they'd frozen his business accounts pending investigation. 3 clients terminated their contracts, citing material breaches that Richard hadn't even known existed. His board of directors forced him to step down as CEO, installing an interim replacement, who immediately started cooperating with auditors. Richard hired and fired 3 different law firms, each each one delivering worse news than the last. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The debts were legitimate. The fraud claims had merit. His best-case scenario was bankruptcy and possible jail time. His worst-case scenario didn't bear thinking about. He tried calling Olivia directly using a number he found through a business directory. A polite assistant answered, "Sterling Holdings, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Olivia Sterling. It's urgent." "May I ask who's calling?" "Richard Dalton. Tell her it's her ex-husband." A pause. "Please hold." 2 minutes of classical music. Then the assistant returned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton, but Miss Sterling is not available. If you'd like to discuss the pending legal matters, please contact her attorneys at Morrison West and Chen." "Wait, don't hang up. Just tell her I need 5 minutes. 5 minutes to explain, to apologize to." "Miss Sterling has made her position clear. All communication must go through her legal team. Have a good day, Mr. Dalton." Click. He tried showing up at the Aura Global offices, a gleaming tower downtown. He'd passed 1,000 times without knowing his ex-wife owned it. Security stopped him in the lobby. "I need to see Olivia Sterling." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm where I used to be married to her. She'll see me." The security guard spoke quietly into his radio, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Sterling is not taking unscheduled visitors. If you'd like to make an appointment through proper channels." "I don't want proper channels. I want to talk to my wife, my ex-wife. I want to explain." "Sir, you need to leave, now, or I'll have to call the police." Richard left, but he sat in his car across the street for hours, watching people go in and out of the building. Important people. Powerful people. People who worked for Olivia, who answered to her, who existed in her orbit. He'd never been in that orbit, he realized. He just thought he was. His phone rang. An unknown number. He answered, desperately hoping it was Olivia. "Mr. Dalton, this is Rebecca Chen from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on the recent revelations about your divorce and business practices. Would you like to comment?" "No comment. We've spoken with several of your former employees who allege a pattern of harassment, financial impropriety, and—" He ended the call. It rang again immediately. Another reporter, then another. His phone became a weapon, each ring a new attack. The media had the story now, and they were tearing him apart with glee. Articles appeared daily. The fall of Richard Dalton, how one woman's secret life exposed corporate fraud. From CEO to defendant, the shocking truth behind a high-profile divorce. She was called nothing, now she's worth everything. That last headline appeared with a photo of Olivia from the gala, radiant and powerful, next to an old photo of Richard looking smug and arrogant. The contrast was damning. His social media accounts, which Jessica had managed, were flooded with comments. Some sympathetic, but most celebrating his downfall. People he'd screwed over in business deals coming out of the woodwork to share their stories. Employees he'd fired unfairly adding their voices. A chorus of people he'd dismissed as insignificant, all singing the same song he'd gotten what he deserved. Richard stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. The house was too quiet, too empty, too full of ghosts. He'd wander through rooms at 3 a.m, touching furniture, looking at art, remembering things Olivia had said that he'd dismissed. "Don't you think this deal is moving too fast? Are you sure about those numbers? Maybe you should listen to David." She'd been trying to warn him, trying to slow him down. He'd thought she was being timid. She'd been being wise. One morning, 3 months after the gala, Richard woke to find federal marshals at his door with a court order. The house was being seized as part of the bankruptcy proceedings. He had 2 hours to remove personal belongings. 2 hours. Richard stared at the papers. "I've lived here for 12 years. 2 hours, Mr. Dalton. That's what the order says." He filled 3 suitcases with clothes, grabbed his laptop, took one last look at the house that had been his castle, his monument, his proof of success. Then he walked out, got in his car, the Porsche they'd somehow overlooked in the asset seizure, and drove with no destination in mind. He ended up at Martin's office, sitting across from his lawyer with those 3 suitcases at his feet like a refugee. "The judge ruled on the debt collection suit," Martin said without preamble. "You owe Olivia $12.3 million. Since you can't pay, your remaining assets are being liquidated. The Porsche, your retirement accounts, a few investments you had in your name. It'll cover maybe $2 million. The rest stands as a judgment against you." So I'll be in debt to her for the rest of my life. Unless you file for bankruptcy, which I strongly recommend. Martin slid papers across the desk. Chapter 7. It'll discharge most of the debt, but you'll lose everything. Your credit will be destroyed. You won't be able to get loans, credit cards sometimes, even apartments or jobs. What jobs? Richard laughed bitterly. Who's going to hire me? I'm infamous. I'm a cautionary tale. People rebuild, Martin said quietly. It takes time, but people rebuild. Did Olivia rebuild? Richard asked. Or did she just reveal what was always there? Martin had no answer for that. Richard signed the bankruptcy papers. Then he signed away his car. Then he signed away his retirement. Then he signed away the last remnants of the life he'd built, or thought he'd built, or that had been built around him while he took credit. He moved into a studio apartment in the cheapest part of town, the kind of place where the heat barely worked and the neighbors screamed at each other through thin walls. His furniture was whatever he could buy secondhand. His food came from discount groceries and dollar stores. He applied for dozens of jobs and got rejected from all of them. His name was toxic. Finally, 3 weeks into unemployment, he got a call back from a coffee shop. "Can you start Monday?" the manager asked. She was young, maybe 25, with purple hair and multiple piercings. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's minimum wage 4-hour shifts to start. You'll be cleaning tables, taking orders, basic stuff. You've done food service before." "No, but I can learn. I'll work hard. I promise." She studied him. "You're that guy. Aren't you the CEO who got destroyed by his ex-wife?" Richard's heart sank. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Maybe you've learned something then. See you Monday at 6 a.m. 6 in the morning on Monday, Richard put on his only remaining nice shirt, wrinkled now slightly stained, and took the bus to Brood Awakening Coffee House. The manager, whose name was Taylor, gave him a brief tour and a uniform shirt that was 2 sizes too small. "You'll start by cleaning tables and taking out trash. Work your way up to the register if you do well." She handed him a rag and spray bottle. "That table in the corner just left. Start there." Richard cleaned tables, took out trash that smelled like sour milk and old coffee grounds, scrubbed toilets, mopped floors. His back ached, his feet hurt, his hands got raw from the chemicals, and every time the door opened he looked up terrified someone would recognize him. For 3 weeks no one did. He was invisible, just another service worker people looked past while ordering their lattes. It should have felt humiliating. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. No one expected anything from him. No one was disappointed. He was just a guy cleaning tables. Then on a Thursday afternoon, the door opened and Richard looked up out of habit. Olivia walked in. She wasn't alone. A man was with her, tall and distinguished, with silver at his temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Richard's monthly rent. They were laughing about something comfortable with each other in a way that spoke of genuine connection. Richard froze, spray bottle in hand, standing next to a table littered with someone's leftover pastry crumbs. Olivia ordered at the counter, something complicated, a drink Richard didn't know the name for, and while she waited, she turned, scanning the seating area. Her eyes passed right over Richard. No recognition, no acknowledgement, nothing. She looked through him like he was furniture. The man with her said something, and Olivia's smile touched his arm. They got their drinks and sat at a table near the window. Richard couldn't help watching them, couldn't help noticing how Olivia looked relaxed, happy, more vibrant than he'd ever seen her. She pulled out a tablet, showed the man something. They discussed it, their conversation animated, full of the kind of intellectual engagement Richard used to dismiss as boring. "Hey, those tables aren't going to clean themselves." Taylor's voice broke through Richard's paralysis. He went back to work, but his hands were shaking. He was 6 feet away from his ex-wife, cleaning up after other people, and she hadn't even recognized him. 3 months ago, he'd been convinced he was the center of her universe. Now he was scenery. Olivia and the man stayed for 30 minutes. At one point, they got up to leave, and Olivia pulled out her wallet. She walked to the tip jar at the counter, pulled out what looked like a $100 bill, and dropped it in. "For the staff," she told Taylor. "This is a lovely place." "Thank you so much," Taylor beamed. "That's incredibly generous." Olivia and the man left. Through the window, Richard watched them get into a town car, a driver opening the door for her, the man's hand on her back as she climbed in. The car pulled away, and they were gone. Richard realized he was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down his face, while he stood there holding a rag and spray bottle wearing a shirt that didn't fit in a life he didn't recognize. Taylor appeared next to him. "You okay?" That was her, my ex-wife. "The one who destroyed you." "The one I destroyed." Richard wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I called her nothing. I thought she was nothing, and she just left a $100 tip without even seeing me." Taylor was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's the real punishment, not that she hates you, but that she doesn't think about you at all. Those words hit harder than any of Olivia's legal maneuvers, harder than the bankruptcy, the public humiliation, the complete destruction of his life. Because Taylor was right. Hate would have meant Richard still mattered. But Olivia had moved past hate, past anger, past any emotion related to him at all. She'd simply moved on. And Richard was left behind cleaning tables in a coffee shop, invisible and irrelevant, finally understanding what nothing actually felt like. Richard's shifts at Brood Awakening became a kind of purgatory he couldn't escape. Every morning at 5:45, he'd drag himself out of bed in his studio apartment, the mattress on the floor because he couldn't afford a bed frame, and take 2 buses to get to work. His body ached constantly now, his back, his knees, his feet. At 47 years old, he felt 70. Taylor gave him more hours after 2 months, which should have felt like progress, but mostly just meant more pain. 6-hour shifts instead of 4. Sometimes opening, sometimes closing his schedule, changing week to week, so he could never plan anything. Not that he had anything to plan. "Table 9 needs bussing," Taylor called out one morning. Richard grabbed his bin and headed over. A businessman sat there, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear. Richard started clearing the plates as quietly as possible. "No, I'm telling you, the Dalton situation is a textbook case of what not to do," the man was saying. "Guy had everything and torpedoed it all because of his ego. We're using it in our MBA program as a cautionary tale. How to destroy a company in 12 months. Richard's hands froze. The coffee cup he was holding slipped, crashed to the floor, shattered. Brown liquid spread across the tile. "Jesus," the businessman muttered, pulling his feet back. "Watch it." "Sorry. I'm sorry." Richard was on his knees, picking up ceramic shards with shaking hands. A piece cut his palm. Blood mixed with the coffee. Taylor appeared with a mop. "Richard, go wash that hand. I've got this." In the bathroom, Richard ran cold water over the cut and stared at his reflection. His face had aged years and months. Gray at his temples that hadn't been there before. Lines around his eyes, around his mouth. His shirt, the coffee shop uniform, had a stain near the collar he couldn't get out. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd fallen and couldn't get up. His phone buzzed. A blocked number. He answered anyway because blocked numbers were usually process servers or lawyers, and ignoring them only made things worse. "Is this Richard Dalton?" "Yes." "This is Monica Reeves from the district attorney's office. We're investigating potential fraud and tax evasion related to Dalton Enterprises. We need you to come in for questioning." Richard's knees went weak. He leaned against the sink. "I've already been through bankruptcy. Everything's been disclosed." "This is a criminal investigation. Mr. Dalton, not a civil matter. We have evidence that suggests deliberate fraud, not just poor business practices. You can come voluntarily, or we can send officers to bring you in. Your choice. When? Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring your attorney if you have one." She hung up. Richard stared at his phone, at his bleeding hand, at his face in the mirror. Criminal charges. Prison. He'd thought he'd hit bottom, but apparently there were sub-basements he hadn't discovered yet. He couldn't afford Martin anymore. Couldn't afford any lawyer. He'd have to use a public defender if they even provided those for white-collar crimes. He had no idea. His knowledge of the legal system had always been from the other side, the side with expensive lawyers and favorable outcomes. "You okay in there?" Taylor knocked on the bathroom door. "Yeah, coming." Richard wrapped his hand in paper towels and went back to work. That night, he sat in his apartment with the lights off, trying to figure out his next move. The criminal investigation meant they'd found something specific and prosecutable. Olivia had documentation of everything she'd said so at the gala. She'd handed it all to the authorities gift-wrapped. His phone rang again. This time he recognized the number. David Wong. "I thought you weren't talking to me anymore," Richard answered. "I'm not. This is a professional courtesy, nothing more." David's voice was cold. "The DA contacted me today. They're building a case against you for fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. They have records going back 8 years. Richard, they're talking about 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The number hit Richard like a physical blow. 15 to 20 years. You signed off on falsified tax returns. You moved money between accounts to hide losses. You lied to investors about the company's financial health. I did what you told me to do, and I documented every time you overruled my objections. I'm cooperating with their investigation in exchange for immunity. David paused. I'm sorry, but I told you I have a family. So do I, Richard said automatically, then realized how hollow that sounded. He didn't have a family. He had no one. You made your choices. Now you live with them. David hung up. Richard sat in the darkness and tried to remember when he'd made the specific choices that led here. Was it when he'd dismissed Olivia's concerns? When he'd falsified that first tax return? When he'd gotten too confident, too careless, too certain that rules didn't apply to him? Or was it earlier some fundamental character flaw that had been there all along, waiting for success to expose it? The DA's office was in a government building downtown, gray and institutional, and designed to make you feel small. Richard showed up at 8:45 with a public defender he'd met exactly once, a tired woman named Sarah Martinez, who had 17 other cases and no time for his story. They have you dead to rights, she told him in the hallway before they went in. The best we can do is plea bargain, cooperate fully, show remorse, hope for a reduced sentence. Reduced to what? 7 to 10 maybe, if we're lucky. 7 to 10 years. Richard would be in his mid-50s when he got out. His entire career, his reputation, his life all gone, replaced by a prison sentence and a criminal record. The interrogation room was small and windowless. 2 prosecutors sat across from Richard and Sarah, their files thick with evidence. They laid it out methodically, almost bored by how obvious the fraud was. Tax returns that didn't match actual income, money laundered through shell companies, investors deceived about the company's stability. Every transaction documented, every lie cataloged, every crime detailed. We have recordings, the lead prosecutor said, sliding a transcript across the table. Your ex-wife wore a wire for the last 6 months of your marriage. You were quite forthcoming about your, quote, creative accounting practices. Richard scanned the transcript. His own words stared back at him. The IRS will never figure it out. I'm too smart for them. Henderson doesn't need to know we're borrowing from their account to cover Patterson. What they don't know won't hurt them. Rules are for people who aren't clever enough to work around them. His arrogance preserved in black and white. Did Olivia know? Richard asked. When we were married, did she know she was gathering evidence? Mrs. Sterling came to us 14 months ago with concerns about financial impropriety. We asked her to continue gathering evidence. She agreed. The prosecutor's expression was neutral. She was very thorough. 14 months. Richard did the math. That was before he'd filed for divorce. Before Jessica. Before any of this had blown up publicly. She was planning this a year before I left her. You didn't leave her, Mr. Dalton. She orchestrated your departure, every step of it. The prosecutor pulled out another file. The mistress, Jessica Chen, Miss Sterling, hired her. Paid her $50,000 to seduce you to encourage your worst impulses to make you feel invincible. The whole affair was a setup. The room tilted. Richard gripped the edge of the table. That's not possible. Jessica came to me. She applied for a job, she flirted, she followed a script written by your ex-wife. Every move calculated to push you toward filing for divorce on terms that favored Ms. Sterling. The prosecutor smiled thinly. You were so predictable. She knew exactly what kind of woman would appeal to your ego. Younger, impressed by money, willing to laugh at your jokes. She handed you Jessica like a loaded gun and waited for you to shoot yourself. Richard couldn't breathe. The affair that had made him feel powerful, desired, alive, it had been fake. A performance. A trap. Jessica's breathless admiration, her convenient availability, her willingness to stroke his ego, all purchased. All orchestrated by the woman he'd dismissed as powerless. The gala speech, Richard managed. When she revealed everything in public. She didn't have to do that. Why humiliate me like that if she already had criminal charges pending? She wanted you to know, Sarah said quietly. She wanted you to understand what she'd done before the legal system caught up with you. This wasn't just about Justice Richard. It was personal. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, Richard had agreed to cooperate fully to provide testimony against other executives who might have been involved to accept whatever plea deal the DA offered. Sarah said they'd probably have something within a week. Richard walked out of that building and straight to a liquor store, bought the cheapest whiskey they had, sat on a bench outside and drank half the bottle in 20 minutes. The burn felt good, felt like something real in a world that had revealed itself as entirely constructed by someone else. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered because nothing mattered anymore. Richard Dalton. Yeah. This is Kevin Huang from Bloomberg News. We're doing a profile piece on your ex-wife, Olivia Sterling. I was hoping you might be willing to comment on what it was like being married to one of the most successful businesswomen of our generation. Richard laughed. It came out twisted bitter. One of the most successful, try the most successful. Because she didn't just build a company, she built a 15-year con that destroyed everyone who underestimated her. That's an interesting perspective. Would you be willing to elaborate on record? Sure, why not? Richard took another drink. You want to know what it was like being married to Olivia Sterling? It was like being married to a chess master when you don't even know you're a pawn. Every conversation, every decision, every moment she was 10 moves ahead. And I was so busy thinking I was winning that I never saw the checkmate coming. Did you love her? The question caught Richard off guard. Did he love her? He'd married her, lived with her for 15 years, slept next to her every night. But love. He'd loved what she did for him, loved how she made him look, loved the life she'd enabled. But her, the actual person, her mind and heart and soul, had he ever really loved those things, or even seen them? I don't know, Richard finally answered. I don't think I ever knew her well enough to love her. And that's my tragedy, isn't it? I had something extraordinary and treated it like it was ordinary. I had someone brilliant and saw her as simple. I had a partner and wanted a servant. He finished the bottle. You write your article. Tell everyone what a genius she is. Tell them she played the long game better than anyone in history. Tell them she turned nothing into everything while making sure I went from everything to nothing. It's all true. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Dalton. Honesty. Richard laughed again. That's all I have left now. Honesty and consequences. The article came out 3 days later. The woman who won inside Olivia Sterling's calculated takedown of her ex-husband. It painted Olivia as a strategic genius. Richard as a cautionary tale about hubris. The comment section was vicious. People he'd never met calling him every name imaginable. People he had met revealing stories of his cruelty, his arrogance, his disrespect. The internet had decided he was a villain, and the internet never forgot. Richard stopped reading after the first 100 comments, stopped checking his phone, stopped engaging with the world beyond his apartment and his coffee shop shifts. He existed in a narrow tunnel of wake-up work, sleep repeat. But the universe wasn't done with him yet. Jessica showed up at Brood Awakening on a Tuesday morning. Richard saw her walk in and considered hiding in the back, but Taylor was watching, and he needed this job. He kept wiping down tables, hoping Jessica would order and leave. She didn't. She walked straight to him. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't have anything to say to you." "Well, I have things to say to you." Jessica looked different. Harder. Her clothes were more modest, her makeup less dramatic. "I know you know. About Olivia hiring me. About the setup." "So you came here to what, apologize?" Richard's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Explain how you were just following orders." "I came to tell you it wasn't all fake." Jessica's voice dropped. "The job, yes. The initial approach, yes. But some of what we had that became real for me. And then it got complicated." "Complicated." Richard threw his rag into the bin. "You were paid to seduce me, to manipulate me, to help destroy my life. But sure, it got complicated. She offered me $50,000 to get close to you, to encourage you to leave her, to make you feel like you didn't need her." Jessica's eyes were wet. "I was broke, Richard. Student loans, credit card debt, working 3 jobs. That money was a lifeline. But I didn't expect to actually feel something for you. You felt something for my money, for my status, same as everyone else." "No." Jessica shook her head. "I felt something for the man underneath all that. The one who was scared and insecure and desperate to prove himself. The one who'd built his entire identity on success because he didn't think he had value without it." She paused. The man I saw in those early morning conversations when you couldn't sleep. That man was real, and I think that's the man Olivia fell in love with before you buried him under ego and ambition. Richard wanted to argue to deflect, to maintain his anger, because anger was easier than grief. But Jessica's words had found their mark. He had been someone else once long ago before success had warped him, someone uncertain and striving and maybe even decent. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost that person, or killed him, or traded him for a version that looked better in photographs. "Did she tell you to come here?" Richard asked. "Is this part of her plan, too? I haven't talked to Olivia since the gala. She paid me, I did what she asked, and that was the end of it." Jessica pulled an envelope from her purse. "But she did give me this. Said to give it to you when you were ready to hear it. I don't think you're ready. But I don't think you'll ever be ready, so here." She handed him the envelope and left. Richard stood there holding it, Taylor watching from behind the counter with undisguised curiosity. "You going to open it?" Taylor asked. "Probably shouldn't. But you will." She was right. Richard took his break, went to the bathroom, and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter handwritten in Olivia's precise script. "Richard, if you're reading this, then Jessica gave it to you, which means enough time has passed that you're beginning to understand what happened. I want you to know that destroying you was never the goal. The goal was freedom. Freedom from being invisible. Freedom from being dismissed. Freedom from sacrificing everything I was for someone who never saw me. You gave me no choice. I tried talking to you. I tried showing you. I tried being patient, understanding, supportive. And you responded by having an affair, by calling me nothing, by offering me $50,000 for 15 years of my life. So yes, I built a case against you. I documented your crimes, and they were crimes, Richard, even if you convinced yourself otherwise. I created a situation where you would self-destruct because I knew you would. I knew your ego would be your undoing, and I'm not sorry, but I am sad. Because underneath the arrogant CEO, there was once a man I loved. A man who worked in a bookstore and talked about changing the world through education technology. A man who was nervous asking me to dinner, who admitted he didn't have much money but promised to make it special anyway. That man wouldn't have falsified tax returns, wouldn't have cheated on his wife, wouldn't have treated people like they were disposable. I mourn that man. The one you became. He got exactly what he deserved, Olivia. Richard read it 3 times, then he tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash. Then he pulled the pieces out and tried to tape them back together with shaking hands, because even destroyed her words were the only real thing anyone had said to him in months. The plea deal came through a week later. 8 years in federal prison, eligible for parole after 5. Richard signed without reading the full document. What did it matter? The outcome was the same. His life as he'd known it was over. Sarah Martinez explained the timeline. Sentencing in 30 days, then transfer to a minimum security facility given his white-collar crimes and lack of violence. 8 years of his life gone. You could have fought this, Sarah said. Dragged it out, challenged some of the evidence. To what end? To delay the inevitable. Richard shook his head. She won. Completely. Totally. Why pretend otherwise? His last month of freedom was surreal. He kept working at Brood Awakening because what else was he going to do? Taylor was surprisingly kind about it, adjusting his schedule so he could handle legal appointments, never mentioning his impending incarceration to other employees. "Why are you being nice to me?" Richard asked her one closing shift. They were alone, wiping down tables, stacking chairs. "Because you're trying," Taylor said simply. "You show up, you do the work, you don't complain. That counts for something. I destroyed people's lives, committed fraud, cheated on my wife. I'm not a good person." "Maybe not, but you're a person who's facing consequences, and that's more than a lot of people in your position do. They hide behind lawyers, blame everyone else, never admit fault." Taylor sprayed down the counter. "You're not hiding. That's something." 3 days before sentencing, Richard received a message through his lawyer. Olivia wanted to meet. One conversation completely off the record, no lawyers present. "Don't do it," Sarah advised. "Nothing good can come from this." But Richard agreed anyway, because he needed to see her one more time, needed to understand face to face how he'd been so blind. They met in a park, neutral territory, public but not crowded. Olivia sat on a bench wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like the woman he'd married than the CEO from the gala. But her eyes were different. Harder, older, wiser. "Thank you for coming," she said. Richard sat at the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance. "Why did you want to see me?" "To tell you something I should have told you years ago." Olivia turned to face him fully. "I'm sorry." Richard laughed bitterly. "You're sorry. You're sorry you destroyed my entire life, and you're sorry. I'm sorry I let it get that far. I'm sorry I didn't leave earlier, when there might have been a chance for both of us to move forward with dignity. I'm sorry I enabled your worst behaviors by covering for you, by propping you up, by making you think you were invincible." Olivia's voice was steady, but sad. "I'm sorry I loved you so much that I sacrificed myself trying to save you from yourself. And I'm sorry that when I finally stopped sacrificing, the only option left was total destruction. You planned it for years. I documented your crimes for 14 months. The planning, the strategy, the execution that took longer. Since the moment I realized you saw me as furniture, not a partner." Olivia looked at her hands. "Do you remember our 10th anniversary? I asked what you loved about me. You said, and I quote, 'You make my life easier.' Not that I made you happy, not that you admired me, that I made your life easier, like I was a dishwasher, a useful appliance." Richard did remember. He'd thought it was a compliment. "That's when I started building Aura Global in earnest. That's when I accepted that you would never see me, so I needed to build something where I could see myself." Olivia stood. "You're going to prison. You'll lose years of your life, and you'll probably think of me as the villain who put you there. But Richard, I didn't put you there. Your choices did, your arrogance, your crimes. I just made sure there were consequences, something you'd avoided your entire life." "Was any of it real?" Richard asked. "The marriage, the partnership, any of it?" "All of it was real. That's what makes it tragic." Olivia looked at him with something like pity. "I loved you desperately, completely, and you loved a version of me that didn't exist. The quiet, simple wife who existed to support you. When the real me tried to emerge, you pushed her back down. So she built a secret empire in the shadows until she was strong enough to step into the light. And when she did, there was no room for you anymore." She walked away, and Richard watched her go, understanding with crystalline clarity that this was truly the end. Not the sentencing, not the prison term, but this moment where the woman he'd called nothing walked away from him for the final time, and he finally understood exactly how much he'd lost. Sentencing day arrived with gray skies and cold rain. Richard wore the one suit he still owned, bought second-hand from a thrift store, the sleeves slightly too short. Sarah Martinez met him outside the courthouse, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sympathetic. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not." Richard's hands wouldn't stop shaking. 8 years. I keep thinking about it. 8 years of my life gone. 5 if you behave. Parole eligibility. Sarah guided him through security. "Remember what we discussed. Show remorse. Don't make excuses. The judge wants to see you understand what you did wrong." The courtroom was half full. Reporters in the back rows. A few faces Richard recognized from his old life here to watch him fall. And there, 3 rows from the front, sat Olivia. Not gloating, not smiling, just present, bearing witness. Their eyes met for a moment. She nodded slightly in acknowledgement that this was necessary, that they'd both arrived at this moment through choices that couldn't be unmade. Then she looked away. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Patricia Morrison, known for harsh sentences in white-collar crimes. She'd made headlines for sending several corrupt executives to prison for decades. Richard's stomach churned. The prosecution went first, laying out his crimes in detail. 8 counts of tax fraud, 12 counts of wire fraud, multiple counts of embezzlement and financial manipulation. The numbers were staggering when presented all together. 4.7 million in evaded taxes, 6 million defrauded from investors, 8 million in illegal transfers. "Your Honor, Mr. Dalton represents everything wrong with modern corporate culture," the prosecutor concluded. "A man who believed rules didn't apply to him, who saw laws as suggestions, who destroyed lives and livelihoods for personal gain. The court must send a message that such behavior has consequences." Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood, straightened her notes, and began Richard's defense. But what could she say? The evidence was overwhelming. The crimes were documented. All she could do was paint Richard as a cautionary tale, a man who'd lost his way, who was sorry now, who deserved mercy. Mr. Dalton has lost everything, Sarah argued. His company, his home, his reputation, his marriage. He's working minimum wage at a coffee shop. He's cooperating fully with investigations into other potential wrongdoing. He represents no further threat to society. Prison time is warranted, yes, but the maximum sentence seems excessive for a first-time offender who has shown genuine remorse. Judge Morrison listened without expression. When Sarah finished, the judge turned to Richard. Mr. Dalton, you have the right to address the court before sentencing. Do you wish to speak? Richard stood on unsteady legs. He'd prepared a speech, rehearsed it a dozen times. But now standing in that courtroom with Olivia watching and his future about to be decided, the rehearsed words felt hollow. Your Honor, I don't have a good excuse for what I did. I was arrogant. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I thought rules were for other people. His voice cracked. I hurt a lot of people. Investors who trusted me, employees who depended on me, my ex-wife who I treated like she was disposable when she was actually the only thing holding me together. He looked at Olivia. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable. I spent 15 years married to an extraordinary woman and never saw her, never really saw her, because I was too busy looking at my own reflection, congratulating myself on my success, never realizing that success was built on her foundation. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly. Go on. The prosecution is right. I deserve to be punished. I broke the law repeatedly, deliberately. I can't undo that. I can't give back the money I stole or repair the trust I destroyed. Richard's hands gripped the table. But I can tell you that I understand now what I am without the trappings of wealth and power. I'm just a man, flawed, broken, humbled. And whatever sentence you give me, I'll serve it knowing that every day in prison is a consequence I earned. He sat down. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on keys. Judge Morrison reviewed her notes, the silence stretching so long, Richard thought he might pass out from anxiety. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Dalton, I've presided over dozens of cases like yours. Wealthy men who commit fraud, who abuse their power, who break laws, and then express remorse when caught. Most of them aren't actually sorry for what they did. They're sorry they got caught. She removed her glasses. I've read the victim impact statements. Investors who lost their retirement savings. Employees who lost their jobs when Dalton Enterprises collapsed. The economic ripple effect of your crimes is extensive. Richard closed his eyes, bracing for the worst. However, I've also read your ex-wife's statement, and it's unlike any victim impact statement I've ever received. Richard's eyes snapped open. Olivia had submitted a statement. Sarah hadn't mentioned that. Judge Morrison picked up a document. Mrs. Sterling writes, and I quote, Richard Dalton committed crimes and should face appropriate consequences. However, I want the court to understand that his greatest crime was not fraud or tax evasion. His greatest crime was becoming someone unrecognizable from the man he once was. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, enabled by success, and unchecked by failure. What he needs is not just punishment, but the opportunity to rebuild himself into something better, something closer to the man I married before ambition poisoned him. Richard's throat constricted. After everything, after destroying his life so completely, Olivia was advocating for mercy. Mrs. Sterling goes on to request that the court consider a sentence that balances accountability with rehabilitation. She's also submitted a letter indicating that she's willing to forgive the personal debts Mr. Dalton owes her contingent on his completion of his sentence and genuine efforts at restitution. Judge Morrison set down the paper. That's extraordinary compassion from someone who had every right to demand maximum punishment. Sarah was gripping Richard's arm, her nails digging in through his jacket. This wasn't what they'd expected. This wasn't the narrative of complete destruction. Mr. Dalton, I'm sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 3 years contingent on good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. Judge Morrison's gavel was already raised. Additionally, you'll be placed on supervised release for 5 years following your prison term, during which you'll make restitution payments to your victims according to a schedule set by this court. This sentence is severe, but it's also redemptive. You have an opportunity, Mr. Dalton. Don't waste it. The gavel fell. 5 years. Not 8. 3 years minimum. Richard couldn't process it, couldn't understand why Olivia would do that, why she would show mercy after orchestrating his complete destruction. Sarah was talking, explaining next steps transfer procedures, what he needed to do in the next week. But Richard was staring at Olivia. She was standing preparing to leave. Their eyes met one last time. She mouthed 2 words, "Be better." Then she was gone, and Richard was being led away to begin the process of surrendering himself to federal custody. The first 6 months in prison were harder than Richard had imagined. The loss of freedom was suffocating. The routine was mind-numbing. Wake at 6, breakfast at 7, work detail cleaning industrial kitchens, lunch, mandatory rehabilitation classes, dinner, lockdown. Every day the same, every day a reminder of what he'd lost. His cellmate was a man named Marcus, serving time for a Ponzi scheme that had defrauded elderly investors. Marcus was 52, bitter convinced he'd been unfairly targeted. "The system's rigged against successful people," Marcus would say every night. "They can't stand to see someone rise above their station, so they tear you down." Richard listened to these speeches for weeks before finally responding. "Or maybe we actually committed crimes and deserve to be here." Marcus stared at him. "You really believe that?" "I really believe that." Richard rolled over on his bunk. "I stole money, lied to investors, broke the law dozens of times. And I did it because I thought I was special. Turns out I'm not. I'm just another criminal paying my debt." Marcus stopped talking to him after that, which was fine. Richard was discovering he preferred silence to delusion. The rehabilitation program was taught by a counselor named Dr. Helen Torres, a woman who'd spent 20 years working with white-collar criminals. She didn't coddle, didn't accept excuses, didn't let anyone hide behind justifications. "Most of you will leave here and commit the same crimes again," she told the class of 12 inmates on the first day. Statistically, white-collar criminals have high recidivism rates. You know why? Because you never actually take responsibility. You see yourselves as victims of circumstance bad luck, overzealous prosecutors. Until you accept that you made deliberate choices that harmed real people, you're just waiting for the next opportunity to do it again. Over months of sessions, Dr. Torres broke down every excuse, every rationalization, every defensive structure Richard had built. It was excruciating. Facing yourself without the armor of success or the distraction of ambition left you naked and ashamed. "Tell me about your ex-wife," Dr. Torres said during an individual session. "She was brilliant. I never saw it, never wanted to see it. Why not?" Richard thought about that. Really thought about it. "Because if I saw how brilliant she was, I'd have to admit I wasn't as brilliant as I thought. My success depended on seeing myself as the smartest person in every room. Acknowledging her intelligence threatened that." "So you diminished her to maintain your own ego?" "Yes." "How does that make you feel now?" "Like I wasted the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too insecure to handle someone being my equal." Richard's voice broke. "She tried to help me, for years, and I treated her help like it was criticism, treated her insights like they were nagging. I'm the person who pushed away the one person who actually loved me, and I did it because I needed to feel superior more than I needed to be happy." Dr. Torres nodded. "That's the first honest thing you've said since you got here. Hold on to that honesty. It's the only tool you'll have for rebuilding your life when you get out." Mail call became Richard's most dreaded part of the day. He never got letters. No family, no friends, no one who cared enough to write. But 9 months into his sentence, the guard called his name. "Dalton, you got mail." The envelope was cream-colored expensive. No return address. Inside was a single-page handwritten. "Richard, I heard you're making progress in Dr. Torres's program. She's a friend of mine, and while she can't share specifics, she mentioned you're doing the work. I'm glad. This letter isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about information you deserve to have. The man you saw me with at the coffee shop, his name is Alexander Chen. We've been together for a year. He's kind, supportive, and sees me as a partner. We're engaged. I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but because you need to understand that life moves forward. I've moved forward. Jessica has moved forward. She used the money I paid her to finish her degree and is now working in nonprofit management, genuinely helping people. Even David Wong has moved forward, starting his own consulting firm, helping companies avoid the mistakes you made. Everyone has moved forward except you. But you can. You can choose every day you're in there to become someone different, someone better, someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes. That's my hope for you. That's what I meant when I mouthed, "be better" at your sentencing. Not for me, for you, Olivia. Richard read the letter until the words blurred. She was engaged. She'd moved on completely. And somehow that hurt less than he expected. Because she was right. Life had moved forward without him, and the only question was what kind of person he'd be when he finally stepped back into it. He threw himself into rehabilitation with new intensity, attended every program, volunteered for extra work details, started taking online courses in ethics and business law, trying to understand where he'd gone wrong from an academic perspective, began writing pages and pages of reflection apologies he'd never send admissions of guilt examinations of his character. Dr. Torres read some of his writing during their sessions. You're getting somewhere, but you're still writing to an audience. You're still trying to justify or explain. Write for yourself. Write the truth no one else needs to hear. So Richard did. He wrote about being terrified his entire adult life that someone would discover he wasn't as smart as he pretended. He wrote about envying Olivia's calm confidence, her genuine intelligence, and how that envy had curdled into dismissiveness. He wrote about loving the idea of success more than he'd loved anything real. He wrote about the moment he'd realized Jessica was fake and feeling almost relieved because it meant he didn't have to maintain the performance anymore. He wrote until his hand cramped and his soul felt scraped raw. And slowly, painfully, something shifted. He started to see himself clearly. Not the CEO he'd pretended to be, not the victim he'd tried to claim he was. Just Richard, flawed, broken, but maybe possibly capable of becoming something better. 2 years and 8 months into his sentence, Richard faced the parole board. Sarah had helped him prepare from the outside, coaching him on what to say, but she'd been clear parole was far from guaranteed. You'll need to demonstrate genuine rehabilitation remorse and a plan for reintegration, she'd told him during a phone call. They'll ask hard questions, answer honestly. The board consisted of 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, all reviewing thick files about Richard's crimes and his time in prison. The chairwoman, Mrs. Delgado, spoke first. Mr. Dalton, you're eligible for parole after serving approximately 56% of your sentence. Tell us why you believe you should be released. Richard had rehearsed this answer 100 times, but now facing them, he abandoned his script. I'm not sure I should be released. I committed serious crimes, hurt a lot of people, destroyed lives. 2 years and 8 months doesn't undo that damage. He paused. But I'm not the same person who came here. That person was arrogant, cruel, and so wrapped up in his own ego he couldn't see reality. I've spent every day in here trying to become someone different. Someone who understands that laws aren't suggestions, that people aren't tools, that success without integrity is just another form of failure. Pretty words, one of the male board members said. How do we know they're genuine? You don't. I don't even know if they're genuine. I just know I'm trying. I'm taking classes, attending every program, working with Dr. Torres, and when I get out, if I get out, I have no illusions about what's waiting for me. No job prospects, no money, no reputation, just the chance to rebuild something small and honest. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove I've changed, not through words, but through years of living differently. The board deliberated for 20 minutes while Richard waited in an adjacent room, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. When they called him back, Mrs. Delgado's expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Dalton, this board has reviewed your file extensively. Your institutional record is exemplary. Dr. Torres's reports indicate significant psychological progress. Your victim restitution plan is reasonable and realistic. She paused. However, your crimes were severe and their impact extensive. We're granting parole effective 30 days from today, contingent on strict supervised release terms. You'll wear a monitor. You'll submit to regular drug testing. You'll maintain steady employment. You'll continue therapy, and you'll make monthly restitution payments. Any violation results in immediate return to prison to serve your remaining sentence. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Don't thank us, Mr. Dalton. Prove we made the right decision. Richard's release day was a cold morning in November. He walked out of the federal facility with $73 in his commissary account, the clothes he'd worn to sentencing, and a bus ticket to the city. No one was there to pick him up. No family, no friends, no celebration, just freedom and the weight of starting over. He took the bus to his old neighborhood, walked past the house that had been his, now occupied by strangers, walked past the coffee shop where he'd worked, now under new management. Everything familiar but transformed, like visiting a place from a dream. His parole officer, a stern woman named Officer Ramirez, had helped him secure a room in a halfway house and a job at a warehouse. The room was tiny, institutional smelling of industrial cleaner. The job was loading trucks minimum wage brutal on his body that had aged during incarceration. But it was honest work. And Richard showed up every day on time, grateful to be there. 3 months after his release, Richard was stocking shelves during his lunch break when someone said his name. He turned to find Taylor, his old manager from Brood Awakening, standing there with a surprised smile. "Richard, I heard you got out. How are you?" "I'm managing, working here, staying out of trouble." He gestured at the warehouse around them. "It's not much, but it's something." "I'm glad you landed on your feet." Taylor hesitated. "Listen, I'm opening my own coffee shop, independent, not a chain. I need reliable people. The pay isn't great, but it's better than warehouse work. You interested?" Richard felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Hope. "You'd hire me, knowing everything. You showed up when you worked for me, did the job, didn't complain. That's what I care about." Taylor shrugged. "Plus, everyone deserves a second chance. What do you say?" "I say yes. Absolutely yes. Thank you." Working at Taylor's coffee shop felt like coming home. The work was familiar, the rhythm comfortable. Taylor treated him with respect, not pity. She paid him fairly, gave him regular hours, and slowly Richard began to rebuild something resembling a life. He attended therapy twice a week, continued his online courses, made his restitution payments on time every month. His parole officer grudgingly admitted he was a model parolee. The ankle monitor came off after 6 months. Small victories, but they felt enormous. 1 year after his release, Richard was closing the coffee shop on a Saturday night when the door opened. He looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. Olivia stood there. Richard's hands froze. She looked different again, softer somehow, more relaxed. A ring on her left hand, engagement ring and wedding band both. So she'd married Alexander, built the life she deserved. "We're closed," Richard managed to say. "I know, I saw you through the window. Thought maybe we could talk." Olivia gestured to the tables. "If you're willing." Richard nodded, unable to speak. He finished wiping down the machine with shaking hands, then sat across from her at a table by the window. The same spot where he'd cleaned up after her that day, invisible and broken. The same spot where his old life had fully died. "You look good," Olivia said. "Healthy. Taylor tells me you're a great employee." "You know Taylor. I'm one of her investors. I helped her get the loan to open this place." Olivia smiled slightly. "I didn't tell her to hire you. That was her decision. But I did tell her you were a good worker when she asked for a reference." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Why? After everything I did, why would you help me?" "Because destroying you was never the end goal. It was the necessary step to free us both." Olivia's voice was gentle. "You needed to fall completely to understand what you'd become. I needed to make sure there were consequences, so you couldn't just charm your way into another situation where you'd hurt people. But once those goals were accomplished, I had no interest in grinding you into dust forever. I don't deserve your kindness." "Probably not. But that's the thing about Grace, Richard. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to help someone become better instead of ensuring they stay broken." Olivia pulled an envelope from her purse. "This is the documentation showing I've forgiven your personal debts to me. $12 million cleared. You still owe restitution to other victims through the court, but nothing to me." Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" "Because you're doing the work. Dr. Torres sends me updates. Yes, I'm the one funding that program, and yes, she has your permission to share progress reports as part of your rehabilitation agreement. You've changed, Richard. Actually changed. Not just performed change, but fundamentally transformed yourself." Olivia stood. That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not punishment, just for you to become the man you were capable of being before success corrupted you. Are you happy? Richard asked. With Alexander, with your life. I'm extraordinarily happy. He's my partner in every sense. We build together, dream together, challenge each other. It's everything I wanted with you but never got. Olivia's expression softened. And I hope someday you find that too. Not with me, that ship sailed years ago, but with someone who sees you as you actually are and loves you anyway. She walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. I'm starting a foundation for financial literacy and ethical business practices, teaching young entrepreneurs how to build successful companies without sacrificing their integrity. I want you to be one of the speakers. Richard's jaw dropped. Me? Why would anyone want to hear from me? Because you're the perfect cautionary tale. You made every mistake, paid the price, and came out the other side trying to be better. That's a powerful story. That's a story that might save someone else from making the same mistakes. Olivia smiled. Think about it. No pressure. But I think you'd be good at it. She left, and Richard sat in the empty coffee shop, holding documentation of $12 million in forgiven debt, and cried. Not tears of grief or regret, though those were there too, but tears of gratitude. For mercy he didn't deserve, for a second chance he'd barely earned, for the woman who'd been strong enough to destroy him and compassionate enough to help him rebuild. 5 years after his release, Richard stood in front of a room full of business school students at a major university. His hair was mostly gray now, his face lined with years of hard work and harder lessons, but his eyes were clear, honest, free from the desperation that had driven him for so long. My name is Richard Dalton, he began, and 10 years ago I was CEO of a mid-sized tech company driving a Porsche, living in a mansion, and convinced I was the smartest person in every room. Today I'm a recovering fraud convict working as an assistant manager at an independent coffee shop and taking night classes to finish my ethics certification. He clicked to the first slide, a photo of himself from the gala, smug and arrogant, next to a recent photo taken at the coffee shop, humble and honest. This is a presentation about how to destroy everything you've built through arrogance, fraud, and the fundamental failure to see the people around you as human beings. It's also about how to rebuild from nothing when you've finally learned that lesson. And I'm going to tell you everything, every mistake, every crime, every moment of stupidity, because if my story saves even one of you from making the same choices, then maybe the last 10 years of hell will have been worth something. The students listened riveted as Richard walked them through his rise and fall. He didn't sugarcoat anything, didn't portray himself as a victim, laid bare every fraudulent decision, every moment of cruelty, every time he'd chosen ego over ethics. And the worst part, he said, coming to his conclusion, the absolute worst part wasn't losing my company or my house or going to prison. It was realizing I'd spent 15 years married to an extraordinary woman, and I'd never really known her, never seen her, never appreciated what I had, until it was too late to get it back. In the back of the auditorium, Olivia sat with Alexander watching Richard speak. He didn't know she was there. She hadn't told him she was coming, but she wanted to see this, wanted to witness the man he'd become. He's really done the work, Alexander whispered to her. He has, Olivia agreed. He's become the man I hoped he could be, just 10 years too late for us. Do you regret it, what you did? Olivia thought about that question, thought about the years of planning the gala revelation, the complete destruction of Richard's life, thought about her own journey from invisible wife to CEO, from supporting character to author of her own story. I regret that it was necessary, she finally said, but I don't regret doing it. He needed to be stopped, and I needed to be free. What happened after his redemption, his growth, that was his choice. All I did was create the conditions that made choice possible. Richard finished his presentation to thunderous applause. Students lined up to ask questions, to shake his hand, to thank him for his honesty. And Richard answered each one patiently, humbly, without the ego that had once driven every interaction. Later in the parking lot, Olivia approached him. Richard saw her and Alexander together, and for the first time there was no jealousy, no bitterness, just genuine happiness for her. You were amazing in there, Olivia said. I meant every word. Telling my story, helping others avoid my mistakes. It's the only way I know to make restitution for what I did. Richard extended his hand to Alexander. "You must be Alexander. I've heard wonderful things." "I've heard quite a lot about you, too," Alexander said with a wry smile, shaking Richard's hand. "It's good to finally meet the man behind the legend." "The cautionary tale, you mean?" "The redemption story," Alexander corrected gently. They talked for a few minutes, the three of them, about Olivia's foundation and Richard's speaking engagements and the strange paths life takes. It was cordial, warm even. Two people who'd once destroyed each other, now able to stand in the same space without toxicity. As they parted ways, Olivia touched Richard's arm. "I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. You did something most people never do. You actually changed." "I had a good teacher," Richard said. "She taught me what it looks like when someone becomes more than anyone expected. I'm just trying to follow her example." Richard walked to his car, a 10-year-old Honda he'd bought for cash, and drove to his apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. He made dinner simple but satisfying, ate while reading a book on ethical leadership, went to bed at a reasonable hour because he had to open the coffee shop at 6 the next morning. It was a small life. A humble life, nothing like the empire he'd once commanded, but it was honest. It was his. And for the first time in his entire adult life, Richard Dalton was enough exactly as he was. He'd called Olivia nothing, and she'd proven she was everything. She'd called him on his crimes, and he'd discovered who he actually was beneath the arrogance. In the end, they'd both won and both lost, and both become something more than they'd been. And that Richard finally understood was the only victory that mattered, not defeating someone else, but becoming the person you were always capable of being. The woman he'd dismissed had frozen an entire room with her name, destroyed his empire with her truth, and then shown him mercy he never deserved. She'd taught him the hardest lesson anyone could learn, that people aren't pawns in your story, that consequences are real, that character is built in how you handle falling, not how you celebrate rising. Richard fell asleep that night grateful for every terrible thing that had happened, because without it, he'd still be the man who thought he was everything, while actually being nothing at all.